I'm Claire Benton, 34 years old, and last Thanksgiving my parents told me to sell my home to my sister or never speak to them again. They said it with calm voices, as if it were common sense, like fairness meant giving away what was mine to the one who always had more. They didn't ask me. They brought a realtor, they brought paperwork, they brought ultimatums. But what they didn't bring was knowledge of the contract I'd signed 3 days earlier. Because by the time they showed up, the house wasn't mine anymore, and the man who now owned it had a very personal connection to my sister. Before we go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours. I grew up in the foothills outside Sacramento in a 3-bedroom split level with beige carpets and the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business by Sunday afternoon. My father, Ray, ran a small construction crew and came home with dust in his hair and exact opinions about how children should behave. My mother, Linda, stayed home keeping her hair curled and her standards high. I was the firstborn, quiet, studious, the kind of girl who always cleaned up after herself. They called me dependable. What they meant was invisible. My sister Jenna came along 4 years later with curls and charm and a talent for performing at just the right volume. I remember being 9 and watching my parents beam as she clumsily tapped her way across a recital stage. That same week, I'd won a regional math competition. No one mentioned it. She doesn't need the attention, my mother would say. She's steady. And I was for a while. Grandma Helen saw things differently. She was my dad's mother, a retired teacher who still graded me like a student, carefully, affectionately, with pen in hand. Every time she came over, she'd bring a new recipe, a crossword puzzle, or a question about what I was reading. When I made honor roll for the 6th straight semester, she baked a cake with my name in cursive. When my parents forgot my 16th birthday, she handed me car keys to her old Honda Civic freshly vacuumed and said, "Because no one else is seeing how far you've come." Jenna went off to college in Los Angeles, paid for by Mom and Dad without hesitation. Meanwhile, I worked weekends at a diner and filed student aid forms by flashlight after everyone had gone to bed. They called it character building. She changed majors 5 times. I graduated early magna cum laude in accounting. When I passed the CPA exam on my first try, Grandma Helen was the only one who took me out to dinner. A few months after that, Jenna got engaged to a man she'd known for 12 weeks. There was a party with 50 people in a photo booth. I was asked to watch the door. I didn't mind. I'd learned to take my wins in silence until the biggest one of all arrived in an envelope postmarked from Grandma's lawyer. Her will was short and direct. The house, her house on Elmwood Street with its wraparound porch and rose garden, was left solely to me. No co-ownership, no conditions, just my name and the address. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The letter from Grandma's attorney had barely cooled in my hands before the messages started. First a text from my mother. "Claire, honey, we should talk about the house. It's a lot for one person." Then one from Dad, pretending to be practical. "Don't rush into anything. There are long-term implications here." And of course, Jenna, who called crying the very next night. "I'm not saying it should go to me, but maybe we could share it." She sniffled. "You already have a place, Claire. It's not like you need this one." I was still living in a second-floor studio over a closed-down nail salon, peeling paint drafty windows, a landlord who treated heat like a luxury. "You already have a place." That phrase sat with me for days, like I'd claimed too much, like I'd taken something that never belonged to me. The calls kept coming. Then came the texts, dozens sometimes within minutes of each other. My mother wrote family means sharing Claire. This isn't who you are. Dad sent one that just read, "Don't forget where you came from." Jenna switched between guilt and flattery. "You're always the strong one, and Grandma wouldn't want this to tear us apart." After a while, their messages started sounding alike, like someone had typed up a script and passed it around. The pressure was constant. Sunrise to midnight every day. Then it turned into something else. Aunt Rachel called from Denver, a woman I hadn't spoken to since college. She asked how I was doing, then quickly added that she'd heard about the family disagreement. I told her I was fine. She said, "Claire, sweetheart, your sister's always been a bit delicate. You've always been more grounded. Don't let this ruin things." I thanked her and hung up. 3 hours later, I got the same call from Uncle Pete in Michigan, then a cousin in Dallas, and finally someone named Darla who used to babysit Jenna. I hadn't seen Darla in 2 decades. Every single one of them told me how important it was to keep the family together. The worst of it came a few days before the final meeting at Attorney Carver's office. My father sent one last text. "You have a choice. Either sell the house and split the money with Jenna, or consider yourself cut off from this family for good." I stared at that message for a long time. My stomach went cold, and my hands started to shake, not out of fear, but out of recognition. I'd heard that voice before, the tone of someone who expected obedience as payment for affection. That night, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, Claire. This is Ethan Morales. I heard from mutual contacts you may be selling the house on Elmwood. Very interested. Discretion appreciated." I reread the message 3 times before it clicked. Ethan Morales, the same. Ethan I studied accounting with back at CSU. The same Ethan who now ran one of the largest tech startups in the Bay Area. The same Ethan who just promoted my sister Jenna to a managerial role at his company 2 weeks earlier. I didn't answer right away. I just sat on my couch and let the irony settle in. A few hours later, I replied, "Hi, Ethan. Yes, the house is on the table. Let's talk, but I need this to stay quiet for now." He responded almost immediately, "Of course. I remember how things were. This time you're in control." The next morning, I met Ethan in the park near the old community center. We talked numbers. We talked zoning. We talked leasebacks and renovations. By the end of the conversation, we'd sketched out a deal he'd purchase the home at full market value under his company's real estate arm, and I'd remain in the upstairs unit as a tenant for at least 10 years with the first right of refusal if he ever decided to sell. It was clean, quiet, final, all filed, all signed, all official 3 days before my parents showed up at Attorney Carver's office with their family realtor in tow. The day of the meeting, I walked into that conference room and found my parents already seated. My mother had a folder of printed documents neatly arranged. My father looked like he'd just come off a construction site. Jeans, work boots, a face set in stone. Jenna sat between them, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. On her left was a woman in a red blazer who introduced herself as Rhonda and handed me a stack of papers listing agreements, recent comps, a pricing breakdown, the works. "We have buyers," my father said, "cash offers. We're just trying to do what's fair." "The will's already clear," Attorney Carver reminded them. "Wills can be challenged," my mother replied, "especially if there's undue influence. Helen was old. She wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't speak. Not yet. I let them go on talking over each other, talking through me, talking like the decision had already been made. I glanced down at my phone. A new message from Ethan. "All filed. Everything recorded with the county. I'll be at the house in 30. That was when I stood up. "There's something I'd like to show you," I said. "My father told me to sit down." I didn't. "You want the house, fine. Let's go look at it. Let's go see exactly what it is you're trying to take." My mother looked surprised, but intrigued. Jenna looked nervous. Rhonda grabbed her binder. No one asked any questions. They just followed. We drove in separate cars. I kept my windows down. The breeze coming off the hills felt sharp and clean. I turned left onto Elmwood, then slowed as the house came into view, still blue, still quiet, still mine. And there in the driveway was a white Tesla with Ethan's license plate. Jenna gasped. That's Ethan's car." My father looked at her. "What would your boss be doing here?" I didn't answer. I just got out of the car and walked to the porch. Behind me, I heard doors opening, voices, rising, shoes crunching against gravel. I reached for the doorknob and paused. Ethan opened it before I could knock. The look on my family's faces when they realized who was standing in the doorway, well, that's where we'll pick up next. Ethan stood at the threshold in a button-down shirt and jeans, looking every bit like someone who belonged in the doorway of a house he now legally owned. He gave a small nod and said, "Claire, right on time." Behind me, I heard the soft clack of heels stop on the walkway. My mother's voice broke the silence first. "I don't understand. What's he doing here?" Jenna hadn't moved. Her eyes were fixed on the car in the driveway, on the man in the doorway, and then back to me. "That's Ethan Morales," she said finally, almost in a whisper. My father turned to her. "Your boss Jenna didn't answer. She just blinked like she'd been underwater too long." Ethan stepped aside. "Come in if you'd like, though I think Claire has something to explain first." We stood there for a few seconds too long. Then my father pushed forward, muttering something under his breath about this being a family matter. He crossed the porch like he still owned the place and stopped short just inside the door. "What is this?" he asked. "This isn't your house," Ethan said calmly. "Not anymore." My mother caught up, nearly running into his back. "Excuse me." Her voice went sharp. "You can't just, this is our daughter's inheritance." Ethan didn't flinch. It was her property. She sold it. Legally. To me. He glanced toward Attorney Carver, who had just stepped inside behind us. "The paperwork is all filed and complete." Rhonda, the realtor in the red blazer, stepped forward with an outstretched hand. "I think there's been some confusion. Mr. Morales, right? I represent the Benton family." "You don't," Ethan cut in. "There's no property to represent. I'm the owner now." No one spoke. The air felt thick, like the walls themselves were waiting for someone to catch up to the truth. My father was the first to react, his voice rising. "This is manipulation. You pressured her. You took advantage." Ethan gave a short laugh. "Ray, I paid above asking. If anyone got taken advantage of, it wasn't me." He turned back toward the foyer. "If you'd like to see the property, you're welcome. But this isn't a negotiation." Jenna looked like she might cry again. Her voice came out quiet. "You bought Grandma's house for the company." Ethan nodded. "We're opening a satellite workspace here. Quiet location close to the train, good natural light. Your department will be the first to use it." My mother looked stunned. "You expect Jenna to work here?" "In this house? That's the plan," Ethan replied. "Her team will be based in the front room. We're converting the sunroom into a conference space." My father took a step toward me. "You did this to humiliate her, to humiliate us." I didn't move. "I sold a house," I said, "to a willing buyer who offered more than market. It wasn't about you." My mother's voice shook. "This is what you wanted all along, to punish your sister, to turn people against us." Ethan's expression didn't change. Claire approached me privately. She had every right to sell. The fact that she chose someone with experience managing real estate was smart. You don't get to call that spite. From the sidewalk, I heard someone call my name. Chen, Grandma Helen's neighbor, was standing near her garden gate, watching all of this unfold. She raised a hand and waved. I nodded back. Behind her, 2 more neighbors had gathered, quiet, observant. I turned to my family. "You said you wanted the house. You said it wasn't fair for me to keep it. You wanted me to sell." "So I did." "That was supposed to be for family," my father snapped, "not for strangers." "I'm not a stranger," Ethan said. "I've known Claire since undergrad. We studied together for 2 years. I also happen to be Jenna's boss." His voice softened, but didn't lose its edge. "I expect professionalism in the workplace. That includes respecting private transactions. If that's going to be a problem, HR will handle it." Jenna finally spoke again. "You're not serious. You're not making me work here. The company is," Ethan said. "This location was selected weeks ago. Claire's decision to sell only accelerated the timeline." "This is cruel," my mother hissed. "You've destroyed your sister's life." I shook my head. "No. I just protected mine." Attorney Carver cleared her throat. "For the record, all documents were signed and filed 3 days ago. The title is clean. Claire had full legal authority. No liens, no joint interest, no shared ownership. just her. Rhonda started gathering her things without saying anything. She avoided eye contact as she stepped back outside. My father's voice lowered, sharp and quiet. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." "You already said that," I replied. And I didn't regret it then either. We stood in the living room, my parents, my sister, the man who now owned the house, and no one quite knew where to look. Finally, Ethan gestured toward the hallway. "Would you like to see the rest of the property? The movers are coming later this afternoon with the first set of desks." Jenna stayed rooted to the floor. "I'm not working here," she said again. Ethan looked at her patient, but unmoved. "Then you're welcome to request a transfer, or you can talk to HR about other options. But this space is moving forward." My mother gave one last look around the room, then at me. "We were trying to do what's best for everyone," she said. "I know," I replied. "But not once did you ask what was best for me." Ethan walked with Attorney Carver into the dining room. My parents followed a few steps behind, quieter now. Jenna didn't move. She stood by the door, still holding that tissue in her hand. I glanced at the windows, Grandma's curtains still hanging, the light falling across the same hardwood floors where I'd once helped her polish the baseboards. Ethan had bought the house, but the pieces of it that mattered, they hadn't changed. That night, I went back to my apartment in Redwood City for what I knew would be the last time. A week later, I'd be living upstairs in a place my grandmother had given me. Jenna would be reporting to work downstairs. And the family who once thought they could push me out would finally see what it looked like when I held the deed. Next time, I'll tell you how the first day in that new arrangement set everything in motion, how Jenna reacted when the office setup became real, and what happened when word spread beyond just our family. The following Monday arrived with overcast skies and the quiet hum of traffic down the block. I'd been up since 6 unpacking the last of my boxes in the upstairs apartment. The space felt the same as it had when Grandma Helen lived here. Creaky floorboards, sunlight through lace curtains, the faint scent of old books and lavender. The only difference now was that I had keys, a signed lease, and 10 years of legal protection under my name. At exactly 8:58 a.m., Jenna's car pulled into the driveway. She sat inside for a few moments, her hands on the steering wheel, staring at the front porch like it might disappear. Then she got out, smoothed her blazer, and walked straight past my window without looking up. I didn't wave this time. Downstairs, the company's setup had already begun to take shape. Desks had been arranged in the front parlor. Whiteboards were mounted in the sunroom, and the dining room now held a long table meant for collaborative work. Everything looked modern, professional, nothing like the house I'd known, but I could still hear the familiar creaks in the floor when someone walked across the front room. Jennifer Wu, head of marketing, arrived around 9:05. She greeted Jenna in the entryway and handed out printed agendas before moving toward the sunroom with 2 other team leads. I stayed upstairs listening through the old vent near the kitchen pantry where voices carried more clearly. I caught phrases like client-facing residential workspaces and regional campaign schedule. It was the language of business layered over a place that had never known deadlines or whiteboards. Around noon, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Jenna standing there with a paper bag in her hands. "I brought lunch," she said, holding it out. "From that deli you used to like." I stepped back and let her in. She sat on the edge of the old armchair looking around the space, like she hadn't expected it to feel lived in. "You really moved in," she said quietly. I didn't answer. She looked down at the bag. "This isn't fair." I stayed still, waiting. Working downstairs, she continued. "You living here? It's like psychological warfare." I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. The camellias were still blooming just as Grandma had taught them to. "It's not warfare," I said. "It's a lease." Jenna didn't say anything after that. She left the bag of food on the counter and let herself out without another word. That was the last time she came upstairs. By the end of the week, the team had fully moved in. Staff came and went with laptops and coffee cups, and the downstairs space settled into a quiet hum of productivity. Upstairs, I kept my hours, worked from my home office, and tended the garden on weekends. Ethan called the following Friday to check in. "How's the arrangement holding up?" he asked. I told him everything was in place. "Let me know if you have any concerns," he said. "And Claire, thank you for being professional about all this." I heard from my mother 3 days later. She didn't call, just posted a public message on her social feed, heartbroken to see how some people treat family when money is involved. There was no name, but everyone knew who she meant. I got a few texts from extended relatives, vague messages about clearing the air or finding common ground. I didn't respond. Thanksgiving passed without a single word from my parents. I spent the day at home, made a small meal, and sat on the back porch with a book. A few neighbors stopped by with pie and stories about Grandma. Most of them had heard what happened, some from the sidewalk that day, others from the local grapevine. No one seemed surprised. The first sign of real change came in December. Jennifer Wu caught me in the driveway while locking her car. "Jen has been struggling," she said carefully. "The transition's been hard, but her work isn't where it needs to be." I didn't reply. She added, "We've placed her on a performance improvement plan. I just wanted you to know in case things get awkward." Things did get awkward. Jenna started arriving later each morning, leaving earlier in the afternoons. She stopped making eye contact in the hallway. One Monday, I overheard her through the vents venting to a coworker about the situation. She got everything Jenna said. The house, the attention, the upper hand. She's just sitting up there like a queen, while I have to smile through it. The coworker hesitated, then said, "Didn't she inherit it?" Jenna didn't answer. By January, the house had settled into its routine. The downstairs team functioned like any other office. Upstairs remained my space, untouched and quiet. I hung Grandma's china back in the cabinets. I planted early bulbs along the fence. I built shelves in the back closet for my growing collection of accounting records. Every part of the space felt purposeful, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. One evening I found an old note from Grandma in the top drawer of her desk. It was tucked between 2 recipe cards. "If they ever come for what's yours, Claire, remember that paper holds power. Keep your footing, know your rights." I folded it gently and placed it in a frame above my desk. Word came in February that my parents were preparing to sell their own home. Mrs. Chen mentioned it in passing one morning while walking her dog. They said something about Arizona, she told me, starting over where no one knows their business. The idea didn't surprise me. It had always been easier for them to leave than to stay and face the discomfort. But I wasn't going anywhere. I had roots here now in the soil, in the contract, in the daily life I'd built for myself, without apology. The story wasn't finished yet. There were still more choices to be made, more lines to draw. And soon, Jenna would have to decide what mattered more, keeping up appearances or facing the consequences of everything she'd helped set in motion. On a Tuesday morning in early March, just after the last of the daffodils had bloomed in the backyard, I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find Jenna holding her tablet against her chest, like it might shield her. She looked tired, less polished than usual, her hair swept back in a messy bun instead of the soft waves she usually wore to work. "Do you have a few minutes?" she asked. I stepped aside and let her in. She walked slowly into the apartment, glanced around at the books on my shelf, the tea mug on the end table, the quiet stillness of the space. "This used to be Grandma's room," she said. "You haven't changed much." I stayed near the doorway, waiting. She turned to face me. "I need your help." It took a second to register. She'd never said those words to me before. Not once. She took a breath and continued. "Jennifer's given me until the end of the quarter to turn things around. She says I'm falling behind on deliverables and not showing initiative." She tapped the tablet in her hands. "I have ideas, but I'm not sure how to position them." I nodded once, letting the silence settle before I spoke. "What are you asking me for?" She hesitated. "I know you've done contract work for Ethan's team. You understand what they're looking for, financial structure, projection, strategy." "I don't. I've been guessing." I motioned toward the small dining table near the window. "Sit down. Show me what you have." She opened her files, laid out her notes. They were scattered half-thought slogans, vague campaign angles, a few market stats pulled from outdated reports. I didn't criticize. I just asked questions. "What's the goal here?" I said. "Who's the audience? How do we measure success?" For the next hour, we worked side by side going through her notes, reshaping her pitch, outlining a plan with actual benchmarks. She didn't argue or deflect. She listened, rewrote, revised. When we finished, she sat back and looked at me. "Why are you helping me?" I answered honestly. "Because you asked." She left quietly after that. I watched her walk back down the stairs and across the lawn to the side door. For the next week, she's kept her head down. I didn't hear any more venting through the vents. She started coming in earlier, left her phone in her bag during meetings. The change was noticeable. Then, late Friday afternoon, I saw a familiar car in the driveway, my father's old silver pickup. I stood at the upstairs window, watching him get out, and walk straight to the front door. He rang the bell once. Ethan answered. I couldn't hear what was said, but the conversation lasted all of 30 seconds. My father turned around, face flushed, got back in his truck, and left. That night, Ethan called. "Your dad offered to buy the property back," he said. "Twice what I paid." I didn't respond. I told him the property isn't for sale. I also reminded him, "You have right of first refusal in writing." "Thank you," I said. "Just keeping the agreement?" he replied. Later that evening, Jenna knocked again. This time, she didn't come in. She stood on the porch and handed me a folded note. "Mom wanted you to have this," she said. Then she turned and walked away. Inside the note was a single sentence. "You've made your point." There was no greeting, no signature, no apology, just those 5 words. The next morning, I received a message from Ethan's assistant about an internal strategy session scheduled for Monday. "Claire," it read, "we'd like you to sit in and provide analysis on Jenna's new proposal. Ethan requested your presence specifically." I confirmed, quietly. No announcement, no victory lap, just the next step. That Monday, I walked downstairs through the side entrance and entered the front room for the first time since it had become office space. Jenna was already seated at the head of the table, presentation ready. She glanced up when I walked in, gave the smallest nod, then turned back to her slides. Jennifer Wu opened the meeting. Ethan sat to her right, arms crossed, listening. As Jenna presented, I watched her hands, no shaking, no hesitation. Her ideas were cleaner now, focused, still rough in places, but hers. When she finished, she sat back, glanced in my direction, and waited. I offered a few observations, suggested a timeline adjustment, proposed a budgeting outline. Jenna took notes. When I finished, Ethan looked between the two of us. "That's a solid framework," he said. "Let's give it a run." He stood, checked his watch, and added, "Nice work. All of you." After the meeting, I stayed behind to tidy up the documents. Jenna lingered by the window. "I know you didn't have to show up," she said, "but I'm glad you did." I met her eyes. "It doesn't have to be war, Jenna. It never did." She nodded once. Then she left. That night, I stood in the garden and watched the porch light flicker on overhead. The camellias were starting to wilt now, their petals soft and brown at the edges. The air smelled like warm soil and the last bit of winter. From the dining room downstairs, I could hear chairs moving, the low hum of printers and emails and normalcy. I knew better than to think everything was fixed. But something had shifted, maybe for her, maybe for both of us. The difference was, I didn't need her to change in order for me to live well. What came next wasn't revenge. It was just the slow process of reclaiming space. A week after Jenna's presentation, I noticed a difference in how she carried herself through the downstairs office. She still came in on time and kept to her work, but the lightness in her walk had faded. I'd occasionally hear clipped phone calls through the vents, frustrated tones, curt replies. Nothing loud, just sharp enough to catch. The following Monday, I was making coffee when Jennifer knocked. She stood in the hallway with a calm, measured look. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I stepped aside to let her in. She glanced around my apartment like she always did, brief, polite, never intrusive. Then she sat. "We're making some organizational changes," she said, "and I wanted to let you know before the announcement goes out." I waited. "Jenna's being moved off her current project stream. We're offering her a temporary reassignment, but she may decline." I nodded once. Jennifer added, "This isn't retaliation. It's performance-based. We've had consistent issues with her follow-through." I understood. "You've handled this fairly," I said. Jennifer gave a quiet exhale, then stood. "If she asks for help," she said before leaving, "I hope she knows where to go." That afternoon, Jenna didn't come in at all. Her name wasn't on the whiteboard schedule, and her office light stayed off. Around 6, I went outside to bring in the trash bins and saw her car parked across the street. She sat behind the wheel engine off, staring at the porch. I walked over slowly and tapped on the window. She rolled it down just enough to speak. "I'm not ready to go in," she said. Her voice was flat but not angry. I nodded. "You don't have to." We stood in silence like that for a while, me on the sidewalk, her in the driver's seat. Then she started the car and pulled away. The next day, a cardboard box appeared on the desk in her office. A few personal items, 2 framed photos, a mug, a notebook with colorful tabs. By lunchtime, it was gone. No announcement, no farewell, just an empty chair where she'd sat for months. Later that evening, Ethan called. "She turned down the reassignment," he said. "Filed her exit paperwork this morning. It's done." I didn't say much. He paused, then added, "Your parents reached out again. This time they offered triple." I leaned against the kitchen counter, phone pressed to my ear. "Let me guess," I said. "They want the house back." Ethan gave a dry laugh. "They're very persistent. I told them again it's not available. And even if it were, you still have priority." I thanked him. He hesitated before hanging up. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think she really tried, Claire. It just wasn't enough." I said goodbye and let the call end. The next morning, a handwritten note appeared under my door. Jenna's handwriting folded twice, no envelope. I didn't know how heavy it all was until it fell apart. "You held the line." I didn't. "I hope one day I'll understand how you did it." I read it twice, then tucked it in the back of my grandmother's recipe book. A few days later, while watering the camellias, I noticed the porch next door had new chairs. Mrs. Chen waved from across the fence and said, "Your parents are listing their house." I looked up. "Really?" She nodded. "Said they're moving out of state." "Somewhere quiet," they said. "Fresh start." It wasn't surprising. Running had always been easier for them than reconciling anything. Still, I watched the moving truck pull up that weekend with a strange kind of quiet. They didn't stop by, didn't leave a note, just packed up and left. Sunday evening, I stood in the garden and watched the windows light up with the soft glow of the office lamps downstairs. The marketing team had stayed, rearranged their setup, made the place their own. But the structure still stood just as Grandma had left it. The bones of the house hadn't changed. Inside, I placed a photo of her by the upstairs window. It was one I'd found in a forgotten box in the hall closet. She was seated at the garden bench, holding a cup of tea, smiling at something just out of frame. That night, as I sat in the stillness of her old reading room, I realized it wasn't the house that had changed, it was me. And what came next would grow from here quietly and on my terms. The quiet settled in quickly once Jenna left. Her office stayed empty for a week. Then Jennifer reassigned the space to a newer team member who needed a desk. No announcement, just a new nameplate on the door, a new rhythm in the hallway below. I got used to the silence. The kind of stillness that came after something long and heavy had finally stopped moving. The garden bloomed steadily. I started keeping herbs on the windowsill again, rosemary, basil, thyme. Simple things that marked the passage of time. In April, Ethan invited me to sit in on quarterly planning. I wasn't technically on the company payroll full-time, but I'd been doing steady consulting, financial analysis, budget forecasting, occasional project support. Enough that most of the team knew me by name, even if they didn't realize I lived upstairs. We held the meeting in the old dining room. The table had been replaced with a sleek conference piece, but the light still fell the same way through the tall front windows. Ethan opened with performance summaries and regional updates, then passed the agenda to Jennifer. She outlined new growth targets, then looked at me. "Claire, would you walk us through the revised allocations?" I nodded and stood walking to the screen they'd set up where Grandma's china cabinet used to be. I moved through the numbers clearly, calmly, just like I'd been taught years ago, before anyone noticed I was worth listening to. After the meeting, Ethan pulled me aside. "You've done good work," he said. "If you ever want to formalize things, make this role permanent, we can talk." I didn't answer right away. I just looked out toward the porch, toward the place where Grandma used to sit with her tea and crossword puzzles. "I'll think about it," I told him. That weekend, I was pruning the rose bushes when Mrs. Kim walked by. She paused at the gate, holding a brown paper grocery bag. "You've kept it just like she did," she said. I looked back at the yard, at the trimmed hedges and blooming edges. "She left good instructions," I said. Mrs. Kim stepped closer. "Your parents sold their place, you know. Arizona. They've gone." I nodded. I figured. I haven't heard from them since the move. She tilted her head. "No one around here misses them much. But we always liked Helen, and we're glad you stayed." She reached into the bag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in wax paper. "Peach turnovers. From my sister. She remembers your grandma loved them." That night I found myself reading one of Grandma's old letters again, the ones I'd found in a box tucked high in the closet. She'd written dozens of them. Most were just short thoughts, observations about books she'd read flowers in bloom, memories of my childhood she hadn't wanted to forget. One read, "You can build something slow and strong and quiet, and it will outlast everything loud and temporary." I folded that one carefully and placed it between two recipe cards. The next day, a letter arrived. Not from Jenna, not from my parents. It was from Aunt Rachel. A handwritten note in tidy cursive on soft cream paper. "Claire, I saw the Facebook posts. I've heard a dozen versions, but yours is the only one I believe. Helen always said you had steel in you. I hope you're well. I'd love to visit sometime if that's okay." I put the note on the fridge with a plain round magnet. Not because I needed to see it, but because it felt like a turning of the page. 3 weeks later, Jennifer sent me a calendar invite. New client onboarding, the subject line read, "Internal Strategy Preview." I clicked accept. The meeting started quietly, a few regulars in the room. Then Ethan walked in with a man I hadn't seen before. "This is Brian Adler," he said. "He's heading a new West Coast partnership initiative. Claire, he's familiar with your reports." Brian shook my hand, smiling. "You're the numbers behind the launch," he said. "We've heard great things." After the meeting, as I walked upstairs, I thought about how far I'd come from that cramped studio over the nail salon. I remembered my father's voice when he told me I didn't need a house this size. I remembered my mother's warning that I'd be alone if I chose not to share. But here I was upstairs in the same room where Grandma once told me I'd have to be my own champion. The same garden outside, the same floorboards beneath my feet. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. Next time I'll tell you what I found in the final envelope, a piece of Grandma's story I hadn't seen coming, and a choice I never thought I'd be offered. 2 days after that last meeting, I found a final envelope in the bottom drawer of Grandma's old desk. It had my name on it, written in her neat handwriting, the ink slightly faded. I opened it slowly, expecting maybe another one of her gentle notes or a clipped recipe. Instead, there was a letter and a photocopy of a document I didn't recognize at first. Then I saw the heading. It was a deed transfer, dated almost 5 years ago. In the letter, she explained that she'd quietly started the process of moving the house into my name long before her health declined. She'd known what the others might try. She'd seen how things worked, how some people were handed everything, while others were expected to stay silent. She didn't want me to wait until she was gone to have a claim to something solid. This house was never just wood and walls, she wrote. It was my way of making sure you had one thing no one could take from you. I sat with that for a long time. The letter, the paper, the fact that even in her final years, Grandma had thought ahead not just about the house, but about me, about how I'd need something more than memory to stand on. By early May, the downstairs office had changed again. New hires came in, furniture was rearranged. One of the teams brought in a coffee machine and started holding morning check-ins on the back patio. From my upstairs window, I could hear laughter familiar, but no longer tied to anything painful. Ethan stopped by with a small team to discuss future expansion. As we stood near the front gate, he asked if I'd ever consider purchasing the property outright. "You've got the right of first refusal," he said. "No rush, but it's yours if you want it." I told him I'd think about it. Not because I didn't already know the answer, but because I wanted to sit with the decision a little longer. Because now the choice was mine. Jenna hasn't reached out since her note, but I still have it. Folded, quiet, tucked between pages of the recipe book with Grandma's handwriting. Some part of me hopes she's doing okay, even if I don't need to know. As for my parents, I haven't heard from them either. I don't expect to. But I also don't carry that silence like I used to. It no longer feels like something missing. It just feels quiet. The truth is, I didn't win by proving them wrong. I didn't win by owning the house or outlasting the pressure. I won the moment I stopped asking for space and took it. Some things in life don't need to be loud to be lasting. Dignity, boundaries, peace. They grow slowly like roots. And when you care for them, they hold strong even through storms. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, I hope you know you're not alone. And if this story meant something to you, feel free to share where you're listening from. I'd love to know.